Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 101 of the ITSM crowd as we continue our Evolution of Service Management series. My guest today is Neil Keating. I'm going to start by asking you, Neil, to just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and why you're here today to talk about experience.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Neil Keating, as Claire said. I work for a company called Bright Horse. We purely focus on experience metrics, experience level agreements, helping organizations build experience level agreements, helping them educate what they are, and also training, educating their team to how to manage them as well. So it's the entire focus of everybody in our company. So we offer consulting, education, and technology. I guess my background before that was, sadly, all my career has spent in IT services. So I spent before co-founding Brighthorse, I've worked in IT services, MSPs, large ones, small ones, and that taught me a bit about experience. And there were some stories in there that kind of led me to think about maybe the world isn't just all about SLAs and KPIs. Maybe we need to think of something else as well. So that's kind of how I've got where I am today, and hopefully just help people with just understanding really what experience is and how you measure it, really. And yeah, that's really what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I can see we've got some people watching live. So if you are watching us, you can ask Neil any questions that you've got in the YouTube comments. Just pop questions in there if you want us to pick them up if you're watching us live. And also if you've got any kind of experiences that you want to share. So if you've got some stories to tell, whether good or bad, by all means pop them into and we'll bring them up on screen and chat about those as well. It's nice to have that audience interaction. So the first thing, I guess, because I always like to start with definitions to make sure that we're all using these words in the same way, but what do we mean by experience?
Well, so the way we define it is that I guess experience is that impression that's left on you after you've been through an event or events. So um, experience really is the way we define it in an experience level agreement. I guess put very simply, experience is really how someone feels. So how do they
Mhm.
feel about you? How do they feel about your product? How do they feel about your service? How do they feel about your company? How do they feel about all those interactions they've had with you? Um, there's a science actually called affective science, which is a fairly new area, and it tells us the difference between emotion, moods, attitudes, and feelings. So
Mhm.
typically, an emotion is a physical thing, and you can measure that through physical eye movement, sweat, hair standing on the back of your neck, whatever it is. And feelings are a conscious thing. It's your brain applying logic to how you feel. So you can actually ask somebody, well, how do you feel about what we're doing for you? And that's really what we define it in an XLA as. And a couple of points I think that are important. When you ask someone how they feel, the effective science teaches again that what they do is they weigh up all those interactions they've had with you over time. So
Mhm.
if you've been with them 6 months or 3 months, they're kind of weighing up all those things that have happened, good and bad, and they come to a conclusion that this is how I feel. Recent events probably take higher currency. So if something's happened recently, they probably pay more attention to that. But it's a cumulative effect. It's
Mhm.
not a single transaction. It's a cumulative of many moments in time that they've been with you, whatever that is. If it's a managed service contract, if it's an employment type of environment, they're weighing up all those things that have happened over time and then come to a conclusion. This is how I feel about that then. So it's really about how people feel. And that's really what we're doing in the context of experience level agreements. We're trying to understand how people feel about whether IT are doing the right things to enable them to do their job. So that's that context in it, really. So, and I guess when you think about experience, it's not just about understanding how they feel. It's also understanding why they feel that way. So you must
Mhm.
have context in it. Otherwise, it's great to understand you feel good or you feel bad, but we also want to understand why, so we can do something about it. So it's that whole contextual approach as well. And if we get it right, the effective science teaches us that emotions turn into feelings, and that turns into behavior. And each organization wants a slightly different behavior, whether it's more productivity, making more shoes, creating more ice cream flavors. do more lawyering. I don't know, whatever, whatever the organization's trying to do, we're trying to drive a particular behavior. And if you get the feelings right, then that should drive the right behavior. So that's how we define that experience, I guess, really.
That makes sense. And I mean, one of the things that has intrigued me recently, because I think I first heard about the sort of the XLA concepts probably a few years ago now.
Mm,
And I thought at the time, oh, that's kind of interesting, but it didn't it didn't have huge traction. But then I think almost in the last year, suddenly this concept of experience seems to be everywhere. At the SIAM conference we've just run, we had people talking about XLAs in a multi-supplier environment. So there does seem to be this kind of massive momentum for it now. And
mm.
is that just because it's people are gaining understanding of it, or is there something external that's driving that trend as well?
It's interesting because I agree with you. It's for us. We've been doing this for golly 4 or 5 years now, and when we first started out doing this, we did a roadshow from SLA to XLA, and we went all the way around the country and presented how you move from service to experience.
Hmm.
Some of those were really, really packed, but people were really just trying to understand what it is. It was an education thing rather than it was a practical thing. People weren't ready to think about experience. This is obviously before the pandemic. But I think in the last 2 years, I would say probably, you're right, in the last 12 months, it's really taken off. We sort of noticed it probably 2 years ago when people started, actually, we really need to be thinking about this now. We've talked about it for a while, and now we need to physically do something. And I think there's probably a few reasons for that. I think COVID
Hmm.
probably accelerated things because it becomes more challenging to understand how people feel and to make sure their experience is still pretty good when they're working remotely. I think people have come to the conclusion that every employee at any organization has an experience, whether it's
Hmm.
good, bad, or indifferent. They're going to have an experience, and I think companies are deciding whether they're going to design that experience and try and make it the best they can, or they're going to let that happen by accident. And I think people are now thinking, oh yeah, we should be perhaps designing those experiences for people. We should be actually trying to make sure that people have the outcomes that we want them to have. So I think those things have helped, but there's a wider thing as well. I think there's a book. I mean, it's well publicized. A book called Pine and Gilmore.
Hmm.
Welcome to the Experience Economy, I think it's called, and that was out 20. I'm gonna say 23 years ago. It's a long time ago, um, and they talk about any industry going through 4 stages of development, from commodity to
Hmm.
product to service to experience, and you can apply that to any kind of industry. They apply it to coffee, and but if you think about that in an IT sense, when I started out in IT, which was quite a few years ago now, but it was all about product really, and we were kind of, lots of organizations were buying product, selling product. Lots of MSPs were selling lots of laptops, and people like Dell and HP and IBM and others created ranges of these, and it became a commodity thing. I would say about 2005 maybe.
Hmm.
Those companies that were doing that decided that that became too much of a commodity, and they got into services. So for the last 15 plus years, we've had all sorts of different services. Everyone started creating help desk services, remote services, application services, web services, offshore services, onshore services, nearshore services, you name it. And every single one of those had different SLAs and KPIs. So it became quite complex, and everyone was managing an IT environment with part onshore, part offshore, part remote, part on site, you know, part proactive, part reactive, all these different SLAs and KPIs. And I think probably in the last couple of years as well, people have started to realize that, well, maybe we need to do more than just have services. And I don't really care where the services are based. I don't really care whether you buy it or I buy it, or it's this brand or that brand, it's Azure, it's Amazon. What I need is, we've now realized, I think, that what we need is an outcome. We
Hmm.
want to make sure that our people are productive. We want to make sure that IT is enabling people to do their job, and I think that's fundamentally changed. But just a couple of years ago, I think a couple of years ago, IT were providing great services and doing great things, but actually we missed that link between what we're doing. We're doing these great things, but how do people feel about those? And are we doing what's right for the business? Are we doing things that make you or enable you to do your job? Again, whether it's making
Hmm.
ice creams or shoes or whatever, are we helping you to do that? And I think that's really what's changed it. And I think there's been some really interesting stats. that have come out in the last couple of years about employee engagement, linking to employee engagement to productivity, to
Hmm.
profitability, and people like Forbes and Gallup and people like that have always been saying things. Engaged employees are organizations with engaged employees are roughly 20% more productive, more profitable than those without. So those sort of things, our customers are now starting to say, well, we ought to be thinking about that. I think it was Gartner said 3 out of every 5 tenders in EMEA now mention experience, and
Wow.
2 out of every 3 tenders in the US now mention experience. And I think they're mentioning it because of all those stats. They all kind
Mm,
of, all these customers have started to think, well, actually, we should be doing, we should be measuring outcomes. We should be thinking about um, whether we are doing the right things for our people, and they are enabled rather than just delivering services for services' sake. So I think
yeah,
there's been a lot of change probably, but I think various.
massive.
But I think you're right. 2 years. I was at Sit Show. Was it 2 weeks ago? The service, the support show.
Yes, it was.
2 weeks
Yeah.
ago. One of the biggest topics in the conversation was
Mm,
all about experience. Uh, I was at a local government event last week, and all local government people are thinking about employee experience. So it's across all industries now. I think everybody is now starting to think, yeah, we ought to be doing something in XLAs, or at least trying to measure experience somehow.
yeah.
You know.
And I mean, talking about technology and things like working from home during COVID, do you think this kind of increased adoption of technology has maybe removed some of our ability to talk to people and gauge experience? Does technology kind of put a barrier between people so it becomes more important to measure experience in different ways?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's. I mean, I think some of the technology that we relied on in the last couple of years has been amazing. Really,
Mm.
you
Oh
know,
god, yeah.
we've suddenly from all this sort of Teams and Zoom, and we're also used to doing what we're doing and seeing everyone with headsets and all those things now. But I think you're right. I think what happened is that as everyone worked from home, their lifestyles changed, and
Mm.
they worked in different hours, and they worked. Might have to take the dog for a walk at lunchtime, or parcels are being delivered, or got to pick my children up from school, or whatever it might be. And so their days changed, their times changed, days might have got elongated, and the technology helped them carry on doing their work. But I think it has become more complicated for an organization. If you're all in one building, you're all in one office, you can kind of gauge how people feel because you're all
Mhm.
working together, and you go to the coffees together, you go and have lunch together, and all those things. We don't do that anymore because everyone,
Yeah.
the majority of people are remote. And I think it's perhaps we kind of knew how people felt because we were with them. So we'd probably
Mm.
chat to them all day, and you'd recognize that someone wasn't feeling great, or wasn't enabled, or IT wasn't doing a great, IT was failing for them, or whatever it was. We don't know that now, and we
No.
don't really know how people are feeling when they're working from home. We don't really know how well their IT is performing working from home. So we've had to, I think, rely on other areas. So new technologies come in that starts measuring, how people are using their devices. Lots of sort of technology now have pop-ups to give them quick survey results to say, can we ask you 3 questions to how you feel? Because we're trying to get more and more data, I think, to try and work it out. But I think you're right; it's become more challenging, no doubt.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm thinking as well, because if I think back to when I worked in offices with lots of people, we tended to have the same complaints. It's too hot, it's too cold, the printer's not working. Now that everybody's working in their own little bubble, is it more challenging to kind of measure experience when you know I've got a garden office that I'm lucky enough to work in, but my colleagues working on an ironing board and a chair in the dining room kind of thing. Has that created challenges?
Yeah, I think so. I think the technology itself now is very, very good. We call them all these things experience indicators. So what we're
Mhm.
trying to understand is, from an experience point of view, is what are the experience indicators, and that's everything from the technology you use, the services that you get supported on, the SLAs, KPIs, and things like that, and also then trying to gather sentiment. But it has become harder. I think there's been a shift. There was just a, a customer site a few minutes ago, and I was just chatting to them, and they've moved from working from home. But there's a dynamic with their teams that perhaps the people who have houses and can convert a bedroom and all those things perhaps don't mind working from home because they're a bit more comfortable, and perhaps the younger generation who perhaps are working on the corner of a dining room table or in a shared flat or something like that, that could be challenging. And
Yeah.
therefore there is a sort of shift in, I think, dynamics as well.
Mm.
I think the technology plays well to it. We can still measure things like how your home Wi-Fi is performing.
Mhm.
We may not be responsible for it, but it's an experience indicator, so we can actually measure now on your side of the divide. We can say, well, how well's your, your Wi-Fi performing in your home office? Is that a cause of your concern? Um,
Mhm.
with good questioning, we can ask people how they feel about working from home. How what's their setup, whether they're on the ironing board or they're on the dining room table, or they got an office. I think quite a well-worn phrase, but I think it's really become to the fore. Really, most things that companies buy depreciate immediately. We go and buy a
Mhm.
massive storage system. Well, it's worth less now that you put it on the back of your van than it was 2 minutes before you bought it. You bought a load of company cars or whatever. Well, they've gone down a third in value. The only thing that appreciates in any organization are the employees. They're the only thing
Mm.
that's probably worth more every
Yep.
year because they're more experienced. They're learning more on the job, so they're actually worth more. That's the only appreciating asset that most companies have.
Mhm.
We better be pretty good at looking after them then, making sure they've got good experiences. And I think absolute challenges, but the technology that's coming to the forefront now is I think really good. It can measure all sorts of different aspects, from how you feel about your device, your devices, to the internet, to your Wi-Fi, to your applications, to how you feel about generally working from home. How do you feel about the comfort of your chair? All
Mhm.
sorts of things now being measured. Some through technology, some through questioning and good sentiment sort of gathering. I think it's really changed the way people think and feel. And also, I think we're getting more and more people responding to those kind of sentiment surveys, and we're getting much more data to understand. I think that's what we see.
Mm. So presumably, because again, I think there's a tendency quite often to dismiss things like experiences, a bit fluffy. But from the sounds of what you're saying, there's a really compelling business case for organisations to focus on experience.
Yeah. So there's there's two parts to two types. We were just talking before about people kind of from different organizations. Some will say this is very fluffy thing, and we can't be held responsible for how people feel, the fact that they got up and there was no toast in the morning, and the bus was late, and it was raining, and all those things. We can't be held responsible for that. um, but the truth is, we're not holding people responsible. What we're trying to understand is, well, how they still feel that way, and they don't generally feel that way because the bus was late and
Mm,
and there was no toast. They feel this way, and if you do it in a, we do it in a statistically valid way. So we're using sciences such as effective science, statistical science, to make sure that we can actually get facts from those feelings. So
yes.
we can be very, very confident in statistical language. We can be 95% confidence with a 5% margin of error that the data we're collecting, particularly through sentiment surveys, is accurate. And if
Hmm.
that's the case, we can run a survey and we can then predict how other people feel in the organization. They'll all feel that way, or and therefore we can make decisions based on that. And it's turned it from this sort of fluffy experience is just how people feel, to no, there's a scientific way to make sure this is absolutely how people feel. But then there's hard metrics underneath that, from technology and
Hmm.
from SLAs and KPIs, that give us further indications to why they feel that way. And I think what's changed is the rounded context view. So all very well understanding what people feel. I think it's a great step. So go and ask people how they feel. I think that's really important. But
Hmm.
you've got to understand why they feel that way. So you've got to gather all sorts of other metrics,
Yes.
hard metrics that we can quantify and say, does this give an indication of why they feel that way? That's what we call them, the experience indicators. Putting all that together in the same time frame. So let's ask you some questions about how you feel, and let's also underpin that with SLAs, KPIs, technical data to give us a rounded view, because then we can do something about it. That's the key thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us nicely to digging a little bit more into what an XLA is and how that differs from an SLA, how it complements an SLA. Because again, I think There's a lot of service management practitioners sort of saying, oh, something else to learn about, and do we need to rip up all of our SLAs, and now we need to start writing XLAs? So tell us a little bit about XLAs, how they fit into the sort of the measurement landscape in the organization.
So you're absolutely right. There are a lot of people out there that saying we're going to rip up our SLAs and we're going to only have XLAs, and we've got to learn something new. And I don't believe that is the case. SLAs have been around for a long time. They've been created 20 years ago. They're still there. Lots of people have the key things. Lots of people have very similar SLAs, but they're very good at telling you what to do and how well to do it. So they're very good at sort of saying, well, we need you to keep the server up. Okay. How long do you want me to do that for? Well, 99% of the
Yeah.
time, please, between hours of 8 and 6. Okay. We want you to answer the telephone. How quickly? Well, under 3 rings or 30 seconds. So they're a great tool for telling us what to do and telling us how to do it. And they're very easy to measure. They're just, did you do it? Yes, no. It's a binary sort of activity, really. And because they've been around for such a long time, and because they're quite useful in that way, then I don't think they're going to go away very quickly. The only problem with them is that they don't really measure experience.
Yes.
Never designed to do that, by the way, so that's no surprise. But some of them can indicate experience. So some of those SLAs are really key. So if you, for example, if you fix more incidents at the first line, people are going to have a better experience. If you're reducing incidents through proactivity, people are going to have a better experience. But they were never meant to measure experience. So we just need something else as well. So it's not a case of get rid of those and bring in these. It's a case of let's also add in experience level agreements. So an SLA is typically a measure of output. Keep the server up, answer the phone, respond to tickets. They're outputs. An XLA is a measure of outcome. Are we doing what's right for the organization? Are we helping you become productive? Are we enabling you to do your job? That's all about trying to drive an outcome. So the structure of an XLA is, let's think about the experience outcome that you want for that organization or that particular part of the organization, whatever it might be. Let's think about the outcomes that IT are there to deliver. And they might be various different things: productivity, communication, being able to work from home effectively, all sorts of different. And let's create an ambition, the outcomes we want to stage for that organization. Then what we've got to do is we've got to start thinking about, well, how are we going to know whether we've achieved that? And that comes back to feelings. So we're going to come and ask people, how do you feel about whether we're achieving that outcome? And we're going to come up with some very clever questions and a good way of doing it in a statistically valid way. And then we've got an understanding of how people feel about whether we're achieving that outcome. And then we're going to take the SLAs and KPIs that are relevant to achieving that outcome. And we're going to take the technical data that's relevant to achieving that outcome. And we're going to combine all of 3 of those metrics and come up with a mechanism, a scoring mechanism to say experience is this because we're basing that on this is how people feel. These are the underpinning operational data from SLAs and KPIs, and these are the underpinning technical data from whatever tool that you've got out there. So it's combining those metrics. So SLAs actually play a part of an XLA structure. So we don't get rid of them. We actually use them. We don't use them all. So we just use the ones that are relevant to experience. And we can score, measure, and understand context by, if someone says, I'm not very happy that IT haven't enabled me to be productive, we can look through some of those relevant SLAs and say, well, did we fix issues as fast? Did we fix them effectively? What was the call abandonment rate? Do they give us indications? We can look at technology and say, well, how many device crashes did they have? What was how many blue screens of death? How long did it take them to log in? Because that enabled their productivity. And that probably gives us the context to say, I understand what they feel. I understand why they feel. So an XLA is an ambition underpinned by sentiment, which is underpinned by technical data and operational data. And it's the coming together of all those things in the right time period that gives us this rounded view.
Do you know, I'm thinking back to times when I've been implementing service level agreements in organizations, and the arguments we've had about what is a service, because you always have that discussion about, is email a service? No, it's just a piece of technology. What we want to do is be able to communicate. And it strikes me that had we had XLAs at that point, we could have just said, the outcome we want is collaboration and communication across the organization. Underneath that is email and Slack and Zoom and whatever else we've got. And I'm just thinking that could have Saved me a lot of time in those
Well,
discussions.
the reason I got to where I am, it's just as I said, I've worked in MSPs most of my career. And I remember we won a contract. It was for an insurance company in the city of London, and my job was to go in and put SLAs in. So we designed them all through the pre-sales. My job was to go and put them into the service center, and then go back in month 2, 3, and present the first service reviews, and then hand it over to business as usual. So the account had been settled down. And I remember I'd agreed all these SLAs and KPIs. I put them into the service center and said to the team, big customer, make sure we do really well. There's lots of opportunities for us here. And I went back a couple of months later. They gave me the report, and it was amazing. We'd hit every single thing. Everything was green. And so we all slapped each other on the back. Well done, everybody. Great news. We're going to do really well. And I got in a cab and I drove, went down to the customer site, and I stood in the meeting room with the IT directors and the people responsible for the contract. And I think I did the presentation, and I think I said, "You must be delighted that you've chosen us as your managed service provider." And I kind of said, "Look at all this," and presented all these green metrics behind me and said, "We've hit everything." And I was saying again, "You must be delighted. It's a good move." And the IT director said, "Neil, I don't care about any of that at all." And it really took the wind out of my sails, and it really taught me something, which is why I ended up in Brighthorse. But because they said, "I don't really care about any of that at all. Yes, I can see you answering the phone. Yes, I can see you're keeping the servers up. Yes, I can see you're responding to tickets. But actually, my people have exactly the same amount of incidents they've ever had. The technology fails in exactly the same times it's always ever failed, the same numbers it's always failed. You're not educating our team how to do it. We've got the same amount of major incidents that we've ever had. So in fact, Neil, you're just as bad as any other MSP that's ever walked through this door." And I was standing there going, okay.
Crushing.
And it completely learned that SLAs don't equal happiness. And now we
Yes.
all know the watermelon,
Yeah.
green on the outside, red in the middle. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what I was presenting. It was kind of, well, aren't we brilliant? We're doing so well. It doesn't mean people are happy with you. And we never know if people are happy, or we'll never know if people are productive unless we ask them. And so in the end, I kind of thought to myself, wow, that was a big lesson learnt. So many years after that, I kind of thought, well, maybe I should do this for a living.
So I guess there's so much we could have covered, but I think that's been incredibly helpful in terms of giving people that introduction and those ideas as to maybe why they need to be looking into experience. But in terms of kind of top tips from you, for the people who watch this, is there something that you'd recommend they read? Should they be looking for particular danger signs in their organization? How do people get started and learn more about experience and XLAs?
It's a good question. So experience is quite a deep topic when you get into it. So we run lots of education courses, and if we put them back to back, there'll probably be sort of 4 or 5 days of education. You can go into it in a very deep way. And I would suggest to everybody out there, and some organizations can spend a lot of money and you can get there very fast. You can buy technology, you can implement things very quickly. Some organizations don't have that luxury. But everybody, I think, needs some form of experience level agreement, whether you're government, schools, university, hospitals, finance, legal. I think you all need to have to measure your outcomes you're trying to get to. I always say to people, first thing I would do is immerse yourself in experience. Go and look at blogs, go and read things. Our website's got lots of good stuff on it. Other websites have got lots of good stuff, and just literally go and immerse yourself in the world. Educate yourself on what experience really is. Educate yourself on what a true XLA really is. And then I would say do 3 or 4 things, and you can do this very cheaply. First of all, go and understand how people feel about you now. Just go ask the question. Go and work out. We call that experience now. Go and understand how people feel about you now, because you need that to understand where you're going. You need to know where you are to understand where you're going. Once you've understood that, the second thing I'd say is start getting a blank piece of paper and write down the outcomes you want to give people. Just write it down. Make a statement. I want to make people productive. Whatever it is in your organization, write it down. Make it smart. That's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. Make sure you can deliver it. And now I understand how people feel. I understand what I'm trying to do. And then you can start thinking, how would I ask people whether we've achieved that? And just write
Yeah.
some questions down, and then start looking at your SLAs and KPIs and technical data in the organization. Think, would that indicate how people feel? Would this one indicate how people feel? Now, that might take you weeks, it might take you months, you might spend days on it, but it doesn't cost you any money apart from time. So you can do that yourself. So it's really about understand how people feel about you, create your own ambition, start thinking about what questions you might ask, and and think about all the metrics underneath that. And that's a very quick way of just getting started. I think the key thing is just educate yourself on really what a true XLA is, and how far you want to go down that route. And that will be my top tips. And that, I would suggest everyone just get a bit of paper, write it down. That's the key thing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Huge thanks to Neil. That has been incredibly educational. As with all these episodes, the time's flown, but I think today the time really has flown. Our next episode is also experience focused, but coming from more of a platform perspective. So we're joined on the 7th of June by Chris Pope from New Rocket and Simon Morris from ServiceNow to talk about every experience matters and what we can put in place in order to make sure that we deliver that consistent good experience. So I hope you'll join us for that one as well. But thank you so much, Neil, for being with
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you for taking the time and sharing. I'm going to say your experience, but we've said a lot of experience today.
Experience of experience. Yeah.
Thank you so
Claire.
much for that. Thanks to everybody
Appreciate it.
who's been watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd. Thank you.